The chamber was old, older than most species could understand. Its walls were carved from the bones of a dead moon, polished smooth by 4,000 years of careful hands. Light came from nowhere, and everywhere soft blue patient, the kind of light that did not rush. Rathan Vow sat at the center of it all. He was ancient, even by the standards of the Dravosi, a species that measured life in thousands of years. His body was long and thin, covered in a skin that shifted between gray and pale violet, depending on his mood. The bioluminescent tendrils that hung from his skull like heavy ropes of light had dimmed over the centuries. Once they had glowed bright enough to illuminate a room. Now they flickered like dying candles, but his eyes, 6 of them arranged in 2 rows of 3, were still sharp and still heavy with the weight of everything they had seen. Around him sat the young ones, representatives from species that had only recently been invited into the Galactic conquered. Small delegations from small world, sitting chairs too big for them, staring up at the elder with the wide eyes of children who had been told they were about to hear something important. Reichthan looked at each of them slowly. He let the silence do its work. Then he spoke. "You have noticed," he said, his voice low and rough like stone dragging across stone, "that there are empty seats on the High Council, 3 of them. You have asked your advisors why you have asked your diplomats. None of them will tell you, so you have come to me." He paused. His tendrils dimmed further. "I will tell you, but you must understand this is not simply a history lesson. This is a confession." He leaned forward and the chamber seemed to lean with him. "I will tell you about the species we ignored, and what happened when they stopped asking for our attention and decided to take it." The story he told them began 400 years ago, in a time when the Galactic conquered was at the peak of its power and pride. 12 elder civilizations, each of them hundreds of thousands of years old, governed the known galaxy. They had mapped every star, cataloged every planet. They had seen species rise and fall like waves on a shore, and they had grown comfortable in the belief that they had seen everything the universe had to offer. They were wrong. On the far edge of an unremarkable spiral arm, orbiting a medium-sized yellow star, there was a small blue planet. The Concord's Observation Bureau had first detected it long ago. Their instruments had picked up faint radio signals leaking from its surface, chaotic, disorganized, full of strange sounds and stranger patterns, music shouting, mathematics, war. The Bureau cataloged the planet as a Class 7 pre-emergence world. This was a polite way of saying it was not worth thinking about. The species that lived there, soft-bodied, short-lived, fragile, had not yet left their own atmosphere. They were still killing each other over patches of dirt, indifferences in belief. By every standard the conquered used to measure worth, they were nothing. The planet was called Earth. The species called themselves humans. Arkathan remembered the first reports. He had been young then, barely 800 years old, and still serving as a junior researcher in the Dravoy Cultural Archives. The reports had come through as routine data packets. A new species detected, primitive, aggressive, fractured into hundreds of competing groups. Estimated time to self-destruction, less than 500 rotations. He had read the report, filed it, and forgotten about it before the day was over. Everyone forgot about it. That was the first mistake, but not everyone was so careless. there was a Dravosi analyst named Selith Vaughn. She was young, brilliant, the kind of mind that noticed things other minds walked past, and when the data on Earth crossed her desk, she did not file it and move on. She sat with it, she studied it, and what she found made her tendrils go bright with alarm. The humans were advancing, not slowly the way most species did, climbing the long ladder of progress, one careful rung at a time. Over tens of thousands of years, humans were sprinting, leaping, falling, and getting back up and leaping again, in less than 150 of their own orbital rotations. They had gone from riding animals across dirt roads to splitting the atom. They had gone from burning wood for warmth to harnessing the power that held matter together. They had done, in a century and a half, what most species took 50,000 years to achieve. Selith wrote a report. She flagged the anomaly. She used words like unprecedented and concerning and requires immediate observation. She sent it through the proper channels, following every protocol, stamping every form. The report was received. It was logged. It was archived. It was never read. Reich then paused in his telling, like he looked at the young species sitting before him, and something moved behind his ancient eyes. Regret, perhaps, or shame. You must understand, he said quietly, we did not hate them. Hatred requires effort. It requires you to see something and decide it is your enemy. What we felt for humanity was worse than hatred. We felt nothing. They were beneath our notice. A brief flicker of life on a small rock in a dull corner of the galaxy. We had seen 1,000 species like them, most destroyed themselves. The rest were managed. He let that word hang in the air. Managed. The young delegates shifted in their seats. The conquered had systems for species like humanity, protocols. If a species survived long enough to become a minor nuisance, they were given a choice: submit to conquered authority and accept a permanent place at the bottom of the hierarchy, or be quietly removed. It was not cruelty. The elder races told themselves it was order. It was the natural way of things. The strong guided the weak, and the weak were grateful for the guidance, but humanity had not yet reached even that low threshold. They were still trapped on their single world, still fighting their small wars, still sending their desperate signals into a sky that did not answer. The Kethvari Dominion, the most powerful of the three great elder civilizations, took formal notice of Earth only once. Single meeting, a single vote. The HFY High Commander, a being so old that even Rickathon did not know his true age, reviewed the date on humanity and delivered his judgment in 6 words. In a non-entity, no contact, no protection. That was it. 6 words. The fate of an entire species decided. Less time than it took to pour a drink. The record was sealed. Earth was erased from the active observation list. No embassy would be sent. No satellites would watch over them. No laws of the conquered would protect them. If another species found Earth and decided to burn it, the conquered would not intervene, because in the eyes of the conquered, there was nothing on Earth worth protecting. Kelth Vayon heard about the ruling. She appealed. She was denied. She appealed again. She was warned to stop. She was told that her obsession with the humans was becoming an embarrassment to her house. She stopped appealing, but she did not stop watching. Alone, using her own resources, she maintained a small monitoring station aimed at Earth W as she watched As the humans built towers that scraped their sky, she watched as they connected their world with invisible webs of information. She watched as they reached their moon, their own moon, and stood on its surface and looked back at themselves with awe and wonder. And she watched as they began slowly, stubbornly, impossibly to reach for the stars. She sent one final report to the conquered. It was short. It said, "They are coming whether we notice or not." The report was filed. It was not read. Rathan leaned back in his seat and let the silence fill the chamber again. His tendrils were almost completely dark. Now, the young delegate stared at him, barely breathing. "I found Selith's reports much later," he said softly. "After everything had happened, after the fires and the silence and the reckoning. I read every one of them, every warning, every plea, and I understood too late what she had seen that the rest of us were too proud to look at." He closed 4 of his 6 eyes. She saw a species that did not know how to give up, a species that looked at an empty, uncaring universe and decided, against all reason, against all evidence, to keep reaching, keep building, keep hoping. He opened his eyes again. We should have been amazed by them. We should have been humbled. Instead, we looked at them the way one looks at an insect crawling across a window, a brief curiosity, nothing more. His voice dropped to nearly a whisper. That was the beginning of everything, not because of what they did, but because of what we failed to do. We failed to see them, and in all the long history of the galaxy, there has never been a greater mistake than looking at humanity and deciding they did not matter. The young ones sat in silence. Outside the chamber, the stars turned slowly in the dark, the way they always had, patient, endless, uncaring. But somewhere out there, far from this ancient room, a species that had once been ignored was watching over all of them and the galaxy for the first time in its long and arrogant history. Was grateful for it. Rathan let the silence hold for a long time before he spoke again. The young delegates were still. Their eyes, whatever shape or number they had, were fixed on him. He could feel their attention the way one feels heat from a fire, steady, unblinking. 200 years before this day, he began. Sure, something happened that the Concord's greatest scientists had said was impossible. He folded his long hands. Together, humanity left their star system. It should not have happened. Not like that, not so soon. Every model, every prediction, every law of physics, as the Concord understood it, said that a species as young as humanity should have needed another 10,000 years to develop faster than light travel. The elder races had achieved it through mastery of psionic field manipulation, a delicate, elegant technology that required centuries of careful study and minds trained over generations. It was an art form as much as it was science. Humanity did not have psionic abilities. They could not feel the subtle currents of space the way the elder races could. So they did something the conquered had never considered. When they used brute force, raw, staggering, almost violent computational power, machines thinking at speeds that made the Concords finest computers look like children counting on their fingers. They did not dance with space. They grabbed it with both hands and tore it open. It was ugly. It was loud. It shook the fabric of local space hard enough to be detected by Concord sensors across half the galaxy. And it worked. The first human ships appeared at the edges of Concord, monitored space like ghosts stepping out Of fog they were not warships, they were colony vessels, large, slow packed. With families and supplies and seeds and soil, they carried the tools to build new worlds, not destroy old ones, and they carried messages. Humanity broadcast greetings in over 200 of their own languages. Wick they sent mathematical proofs, elegant, creative solutions to problems the conquered had solved long ago but approached from angles no one had considered. They sent music, hundreds of hours of it, symphonies and simple songs, the sound of a mother singing to a child, the roar of a crowd at a game, a lone instrument playing in an empty room. They sent art, paintings of sunsets they would never see again, drawings made by their children, images of their blue world, taken from space, small and bright, against the dark, and with all of it, they sent one message repeated in every language they knew and every mathematical framework they could construct. We are here, we come in peace, we wish to be your friend. The conquered received all of it, every note of music, every equation, every drawing, every word, and the conquered said nothing. We Rathan's tendrils flickered with pale light, shame. The young delegates could see it. Protocol, he said, as if the word tasted bitter. We had protocols. A species had to be at least 50,000 years old to qualify for formal contact. Humanity was barely 10,000. The rules were clear, and we followed the rules because following rules is easier than thinking. So humanity's messages went unanswered. Their greetings hung in the void like hands extended in the dark, reaching for something that refused to reach back. But the humans did not stop. That was the thing about them that the conquered never understood, not then, not for a long time after. Other species, when met with silence, eventually gave up. They turned inward. They accepted their place. Humanity did not know how to do this. It was not in their nature. So silence did not discourage them. It only made them more determined. They settled 3 unclaimed star systems on the outer edges of conquered space. Systems were poor, thin resources, unstable orbits, harsh conditions. No elder race wanted them, but the humans moved in and began building with the kind of desperate, stubborn energy that only a species with short lives and long dreams could produce. Within a few decades, those 3 systems were thriving. The humans had turned barren rocks into gardens. They built cities and places where the conquered's own engineers would have said nothing could survive. They adapted, they invented, they refused with every breath to accept that anything was impossible, and still the conquered ignored them, rather paused. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, heavier. What happened next, he said, is the part of this story that I carry with me like a stone in my chest. Every day, every night, it does not get lighter. The Velthroni hegemony was one of the 3 great powers of the conquered. They were a reptilian species, cold in body and colder in mind. They had built their empire over 600,000 years, not through wisdom or cooperation, but through control. They consumed resources the way fire consumes air, endlessly, without thought, without gratitude. When a system was used up, they moved to the next. And now they wanted the systems that humanity had settled, not because they needed them, not because the resources were rare, but because the Velrani did not share. It was a point of pride. Anything within reach was theirs by right of age and power, and if something small and weak was sitting on what they wanted. They removed it the way one might brush dust from a table. The Velthroni sent no warning. They made no demands. They did not offer to negotiate or relocate. They simply dispatched a suppression fleet, 12 warships of a class designed for exterminating species that had not yet earned the Conquered's protection. The fleet arrived at the human colony of Nova Catalina on what the humans called a Tuesday. Nova Catalina was a small world, warm green, circling an orange star. It had been settled for 30 years. The humans there had built a city along the banks of a wide river. They had schools, hospitals, parks where children played under an alien sky. They had named the river after a river on Earth because humans always carried their home with them, yet even when home was 1,000 light-years behind them, 2,300,000 people lived there. The Velthroni fleet entered orbit at dawn. They activated their surface bombardment arrays, weapons designed to strip a planet's surface clean of life in a matter of hours. The procedure was standard routine. The fleet commander did not even bother to watch from the bridge. He had done this before with other species. On other worlds, it was nothing. First strikes hit the city center, towers of glass and steel that the humans had built with their own hands turned to vapor in an instant. The river boiled. The parks where children had played that morning became craters of molten rock. The humans tried to evacuate. Thousands of small ships launched from the surface, civilian transports, cargo shuttles, sway anything that could fly. The Velthroni shot them down one by one, not out of necessity. The fleeing ships posed no threat. It was simply standard procedure. You did not leave survivors. Survivors caused problems later. The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it was over, there was nothing left of Nova Catalina but glass and ash. The river was gone. The city was gone. The schools and hospitals and parks were gone. 2,300,000 voices silenced in a single day. The Velthroni fleet commander filed his report. He described the operation as routine pest management. He did not mention the number of dead. It was not required. Humanity's surviving colonies received the news within hours, and then they did something that the Conquered had never seen a young species do. They did not collapse. They did not scatter, and they did not turn on each other in grief and panic. They sent a message not to the Throni, to the Galactic Conquered, to every elder race, to every member of the grand civilization that was supposed to represent order and justice in the galaxy. The message was simple. It said, "Our people have been murdered. Our colony has been destroyed. We ask for justice. We ask for help, please." The Conquered received the message. An emergency session was called. The 12 elder races gathered in the grand chamber, the same chamber where years ago they had voted to classify humanity as a non-entity. They debated. They discussed protocols. They reviewed the legal status of humanity under Conquered law. They argued about precedent in jurisdiction and the rights of elder species to manage their own territories. The vote was called at 11 to 1. 11 races voted against intervention, against justice, against help. The lone voice in favor belonged to the Dravosi, Selethith. Vion, now old and silver-skinned, her tendrils burning with fury, stood before the council and begged. She showed them the images from Nova Catalina, the burning city, the falling ships, the River turning to steam. She played the final transmissions, mothers calling for their children, pilots screaming as their ships came apart, a man singing softly to the baby in his arms as the fire came for them both. The council watched and the council voted no. The Kithvari representative, ancient and unmoved, delivered the official statement: one cannot commit a crime against an insect. The matter's closed. Selith Vian stood alone in the chamber for a long time after the others had left. She walked to her private office, opened a communication channel to the nearest human settlement and sent a message of her own. It was short. It said, "I am sorry, I tried, I will keep trying." She received no reply. Somewhere in the dark between stars, the humans were listening. They heard the vote. They heard the Kithvari's words. They heard the silence of 11 civilizations choosing to look away from the ashes of 2,300,000 lives, and something changed. Rakithan's voice had grown quiet. The chamber around him seemed darker, though no light had dimmed. "I have lived for 4,000 years," he said. "I have seen stars born and stars die. I have watched empires rise and crumble and be forgotten, but I have never felt anything as heavy as what I felt when I read the records of that vote." He looked at the young delegates. "We did not pull the trigger, we did not fire the weapons, but we sat in our comfortable chairs and decided that 2,300,000 dead people did not matter. We told a grieving species that their pain was not real, that their children were not children, that their dead were not dead." His tendrils went completely dark. "We taught them that day what the galaxy truly was, not a community, not a family, a machine, cold and blind and grinding forward, and if you were small enough and unlucky enough, it would crush you without ever knowing your name." He took a long, slow breath. "And we taught them something else, something that should have kept every elder race awake at night. It's staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until dawn." He leaned forward. "We taught them that no one was coming to help." The chamber was silent. The stars turned outside the windows, cold and far away. And somewhere in the memory of a galaxy that had chosen to look away, 2,300,000 names waited to be spoken again. Ray Kethan did not speak for a long time. He sat in the blue light of the ancient chamber, his 6 eyes half closed, his dark tendrils hanging still and lifeless around his skull. The young delegates waited. They had learned already that the elder's silences were as important as his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, the way a person speaks when they are describing the moment they realized they had made a terrible mistake. After Nova Catalina, he said, "1, the humans went quiet." He let the words sit in the air. Quiet. The conquered did not notice at first. Why would they? Humanity had never been loud enough to matter. Their little colony ships, their desperate messages, their music and mathematics, these had been background noise at best, a faint hum in the great symphony of galactic civilization. When the hum stopped, no one heard the difference. The first sign was small. A Dravosi listening post on the outer rim reported that it had stopped receiving human transmissions. No radio signals, no FTL communication. Bursts, nothing. The officer in charge noted it in his daily log and moved on. Species went quiet all the time after suppression events. It was considered natural, expected. The fire burns the Forest and the forest is silent. Then more reports came in. The 3 remaining human settlements on the galactic fringe, small struggling outposts that had survived only because the Velrani had not bothered with them, had gone dark, not destroyed. The buildings were still there. The infrastructure was intact, but the people were gone, ships, equipment, supplies, all of it removed cleanly and completely, as if a hand had reached down and simply lifted everything away. The Conqueror's intelligence services investigated briefly. Their conclusion was delivered in a single line. The human species has likely undergone post-traumatic collapse. Projected outcome: extinction within 2 to 3 generations. The file was closed. Earth's entry in the conquered species catalog was updated with a small notation: status declining. Swarm expected termination within standard parameters. Life in the galaxy moved on. The Velthrani expanded their mining operations into the systems humanity had vacated. The Cathari continued their slow, patient accumulation of power. The other elder races traded and argued and celebrated and forgot. The name humanity faded from conversation. Within a generation, most citizens of the conquered could not have told you what a human was, and for 150 years the galaxy heard nothing. Reichthen leaned forward, and the light in the chamber seemed to shift, growing colder. 150 years, he repeated. Do you know what that means for a species like mine? It is a nap, a brief rest between chapters. For the Kethvari, it is less than that. A single breath. We did not notice the time passing. We had no reason to. His tendrils flickered once, a brief and sickly light. But for humans, 150 years is everything. It is 6 generations. 7, enough time for a child to grow old and die, and for their grandchildren's grandchildren to be born and grow and build and dream. We forgot about them in the time it takes us to finish a thought. They use that same time to become something we could not imagine. It was Selith Vion who sounded the first alarm. She was old now, very old. Her violet skin had faded to a pale silver, and her tendrils barely glowed at all. She had spent her long career fighting to make the conquered pay attention to humanity, and she had failed at every turn, but she had never stopped watching. Alone with equipment she had paid for out of her own accounts. However, she had maintained a small network of long-range probes aimed at the region of space where humanity had last been seen. For decades, the probes returned nothing. Empty systems, dead signal, the silence of a species that the galaxy had broken and forgotten. Then, in the 143rd year of the silence, one of her probes returned data that made her stand up from her chair so fast she knocked it to the floor. The probe had penetrated deep into what had once been human-controlled space. What it found was not emptiness. It was not ruins. It was not the slow decay of a dying civilization. It was 912 star systems colonized, developed, connected by a network of FTL corridors that used a technology the probe sensors could not identify, channels that were completely invisible to conquer. Detection equipment. The humans had built an entire highway system between the stars, and they had done it so quietly that no one in the galaxy had noticed. 912 systems. In 150 years they conquered, with all its millions of years of experience in all its ancient technology, had expanded at a rate of perhaps one new system per century. Humanity had colonized systems the way they did everything else, fast, messy, stubborn, and without asking anyone's permission. Seleth brought the data to the Dravosi High Council. She expected them to panic. They did not. They simply did not believe her. The numbers were too large. The technology was too advanced. It had to be a sensor error, a malfunction, old equipment giving false readings. She demanded they send more probes. They refused. She demanded they bring the data to the Concord. They told her to retire, so she sent the data herself anonymously to every intelligence service of every elder race. In the Concord, most ignored it, but the Kethi did not. The Kethi Dominion had survived for longer than any other civilization in the galaxy by being cautious. They trusted nothing, they feared nothing, but they respected the unknown, and data showing that supposedly dead species had expanded to 900 systems in silent was very much unknown. They sent a spy vessel, a small, fast, heavily shielded ship, crewed by their best intelligence operatives. Its mission was simple: enter human space, observe, and return. The ship crossed the border of what they Concord's old maps called unclaimed territory, and immediately found that the maps were wrong. In every system it entered was occupied: human stations, human ships, human communications, encrypted so heavily that the Keith Bari systems could not even identify the encoding method, let alone break it. And the technology, the spy vessels crew reported what they saw with a mixture of confusion and growing fear. Human ships were not like anything the Concord built. They were angular and dark, covered in materials that seemed to absorb sensor readings rather than reflect them. They moved in formations that shifted and adapted in real time, responding to changes faster than any organic crew could manage. The humans had built artificial minds, thinking machines of a complexity that the Concord had always believed was impossible without psionic guidance, and they had given those minds control of their fleets. But the most disturbing discovery was something else entirely. The spy vessel's sensors detected energy readings coming from deep space, from inside nebulae, from the hearts of gas clouds, from places where nothing should have been, massive structures hidden in the cosmic fog, generating power on a scale that the Keth ferry crew could not process. The numbers were too large. Readings had to be wrong. But they checked again and again, and the numbers did not change. The humans were doing something with stars, not orbiting them, not mining them, something else. Something that required structures the size of planets and energy output that dwarfed anything the Concord had ever built. The spy vessel spent 3 days in human space. On the 3rd day it was detected. The crew expected to die, which they powered up their weapons and prepared for the end. But the attack never came. Instead, a single human vessel approached, small, unarmed, moving slowly. It came alongside the Cathari ship and transmitted a single data packet. Then it turned and left. The spy vessel fled. It crossed back into Concord space at maximum speed, its crew shaking, their reports already being transmitted ahead of them. When the Cavari intelligence service opened the data packet, they found one file, a recording, high resolution, perfect quality. It was the burning of Nova Catalina, every moment of it, the fleet arriving, the first bombardment, the city breaking apart, the river boiling. The ships falling from the sky, the final transmissions, all of it captured. From every angle, Anna, as if someone had placed cameras on every rock and every rooftop and every grain of ash. And at the bottom of the recording, in simple white text, a counter, 2,300,000. Remembered nothing else. No threat, no demand, no declaration of war, just the recording of what had been done to them, and the number of people who had died in a single word that was more frightening than any weapon. Remember, the cavalry brought the data to the conquered. Emergency sessions were called for the first time in centuries. All 12 elder races gathered to discuss humanity. The data was reviewed. The recordings were played. The energy readings were analyzed. The reaction was not unified. The Velroni demanded an immediate strike. Destroy them now, the Hegemon's War Council argued, while we still can, and before they grow any stronger, before they finish building whatever they are building in those nebula. The HFY Council ettled. Patience. We do not yet understand what they are capable of, they said. Striking blindly at an enemy whose strength is unknown is foolishness. The Dravosi, led by Selith Vion in what would be one of her final public appearances, begged for diplomacy, open a channel. She pleaded, talk to them, apologize, offer justice. It is not too late. Council debated. They formed committees. They commissioned studies. They requested further intelligence. They argued about jurisdiction and protocol, and the proper response to a species that technically still did not meet the minimum age requirement for formal contact. They did nothing. Rickathon's voice was barely a whisper now. 150 years of silence. He said we had 150 years to act, to reach out, to say we were sorry, to offer the hand that we had refused before, and we spent those years the way we always spent our time. Talking, debating, forming committees, writing reports that no one would read. He looked at the young delegates, and for the first time they saw something in his ancient eyes that was not sadness or shame. It was fear, old fear, the kind that lives in the bones and never goes away. We thought their silence meant they were dead, he said. We thought it meant we were safe. We thought it meant we had gotten away with it. He shook his head slowly. Their silence was not death. It was not surrender. It was not forgiveness. He closed all 6 of his eyes. It was patience. And of all the things humanity has ever shown the galaxy, their patience is what terrifies me most, because it meant they were not acting out of rage. Rage burns hot and fast and dies. What humanity felt was colder than rage, deeper. It was the quiet, steady certainty of a species that had learned exactly what the galaxy was and had decided calmly and deliberately to change it. He opened his eyes, and by the time we understood that, it was already far, far too late. The chamber was cold, the stars outside, the windows burned on in their ancient patterns, uncaring and unchanged, but somewhere beyond those stars, in the spaces between the light, something had been growing in the dark for 150 years. Something that had been ignored and broken and told it did not matter, and it was almost ready. Rickethan's hands were trembling. The young delegates could see it, a fine constant shaking. Those long, thin fingers that had held books and data pads and the weight of memory for 4,000 years. He did not try to hide it. 50 years before this day, he said, humanity came back. He did not say it Loudly, he did not need to. The words filled the chamber the way water fills a crack in stone, slowly, completely, with a pressure that could split mountains. And they did not come back quietly. It began with a sound, every communication relay in the conquered, every station, every ship, every personal device on every world belonging to every elder race activated simultaneously. There was no warning, no hack, no breach that any technician could identify. One moment, the galaxy's communication network was functioning normally. The next, every channel carried a single voice, a human woman. She spoke in Belthrani, perfect Velrani, without accent, without error in the formal dialect reserved for declarations of state. Her voice was calm, measured, as steady as a heartbeat. You burned our children, she said. You called us insects. You voted and you decided that we were not alive. A pause. The galaxy listened. Billions of beings on millions of worlds frozen in place, hearing a voice that should not have existed. We remember, the voice said. Now you will remember us. The transmission ended. The silence that followed lasted exactly 11 seconds. Rakan knew this because he had counted them. Standing in his study on the Dravosi home world, his tendrils blazing with a light they had not produced in centuries. 11 seconds of perfect total silence. Then the war began, but Reichthan stopped himself. He raised a trembling hand. No, he said to the young delegates, that is the wrong word. War is what happens when two powers fight for something. What happened next was not a war, it was a lesson. The Vthroni hegemony fell. First, their territory spanned 400 systems. Their military was the second largest in the galaxy. Their fleet numbered over 15,000 warships, each one built on 600,000 years of weapons, technology, and armored with materials that could withstand the heat of a star surface. It took humanity 11 days. The human fleets appeared from directions that should have been impossible, though. They emerged from FTL corridors that the Velroni did not know existed, hidden pathways through folded space that humanity had been building for over a century, right under the nose of every elder race. The Velroni sensors did not detect them until they were already inside the perimeter, and the humans did not fight the way the conquered expected. They did not glass worlds. They did not bomb cities. They did not slaughter civilians or burn fields or poison oceans. Every elder race in history that had gone to war had done these things because total destruction was how empires maintain control. You did not just defeat your enemy, you erased them. You made sure they could never rise again. Humanity did none of this. Their strikes were surgical, precise, almost delicate. They targeted military installations, fleet command centers, weapons factories, and communication hubs. They cut the hegemony's ability to fight the way a surgeon cuts away a tumor, carefully, methodically, leaving everything else intact. The Velthroni fleet scrambled to respond, but they were fighting an enemy they could not predict. Human ships moved in patterns controlled by artificial intelligence, networks that thought 1,000 times faster than any organic mind. Every Belthrani tactic was countered before it could be executed. Every formation was broken before it could form. Every trap was anticipated. Every ambush was reversed. In 11 days, the Velroni military ceased to exist. Their fleet was scattered. Their command structure was gone. Their government built on a foundation of military power collapsed under its own weight when and then. Humanity did something that no conquering species had ever done in the history of the galaxy. They freed the slaves the Valroni hegemony had maintained 14 vassal species, smaller civilizations that had been conquered and absorbed over hundreds of thousands of years. These species served the hegemony. They worked their mines, built their ships, grew their food. They had no rights, no representation, no voice. They existed to serve, and they had been serving for so long that most of them had forgotten what freedom felt like. Humanity found them, liberated them, provided them with supplies, medicine, and the tools to rebuild. And this was the part that stunned they conquered into silence. Humanity asked them what they wanted, not told them. Asked them when the galaxy did not know what to do with this information, but there was no time to process it because humanity was not finished. The HFY Dominion had been watching. They were the oldest, the most powerful, the most feared of all the elder races. They had ruled their portion of the galaxy for longer than most stars had been burning, and they had spent the 150 years of humanity's silence building the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen, 40,000 warships, each one larger than a human colony ship, each one carrying weapons that could crack a planet in half. The KTH very high commander, the same ancient being who had once dismissed humanity with 6 words, gathered this fleet in the pale corridor, a narrow stretch of open space between Cathari territory and the expanding front of human operations. 40,000 ships, the greatest concentration of military power in galactic history, a wall of steel and fire that stretched across light years of space. Humanity sent 6,000 ships to meet them. The Battle of the Pale Corridor lasted 9 hours. It was the most documented military engagement in history. Every conquered species with a sensor array pointed it at the corridor and watched. What they saw changed everything. The human ships were smaller, they were faster, they were darker, they moved through space like schools of fish. No, like something more dangerous than fish, like thoughts, like ideas. They flowed around the Kavari formations, finding gaps, exploiting weaknesses, striking and vanishing, and striking again before the enemy could turn to face them. The Kavari fired weapons that could destroy moons. Human ships were not where the weapons hit. Their AI networks predicted firing solutions before the Kavari gunners had finished calculating them. The humans were ghosts, they were shadows. They were everywhere and nowhere, and their weapons, the conquered had never seen anything like them. Beams of energy that bent around shields, projectiles that phased through armor as if it were not there, devices that created temporary pockets of collapsed space, crushing everything inside them into nothing. The mysterious structures in the nebulae, the ones the Cathari spy vessel had detected years ago, were stellar engines humanity had learned to harness entire stars, not just for energy, for weapons. 9 hours, 40,000 Kavari warships went into the Pale Corridor. 9,000 came out. Humanity lost 400, and the Kavari High Commander sent a message to the conquered from his damaged flagship. It contained 2 words: they win. Then he shut down his engines and waited. The human fleet surrounded him, but did not fire. They waited too. Third Elder Power, the Ulari Collective, did not wait. The Ulari were different. From the Velrani and the Kithvari, they were not warriors, they were scientists. Biologists, they had spent their long history studying life in all its forms, and they had learned to manipulate it with a precision that bordered on artistry. They could design diseases the way a painter designs a landscape, complex, beautiful in their terrible efficiency, and targeted to destroy exactly what they were meant to destroy. When the Ulmari saw the Velthroni fall and the Kethavari broken, they panicked. Once they decided that humanity was too dangerous to defeat through force, so they chose a different weapon. They built a bioweapon, a virus engineered specifically to target human biology. It was designed to spread fast, kill slowly, and leave no survivors. The Ulari launched it toward human space, using automated delivery systems hidden inside commercial shipping routes. Humanity's AI networks detected the launch within minutes. Every delivery system was intercepted, every virus sample was captured and analyzed. Not a single unit reached a human population. And then humanity did something far worse than retaliation. They traced the bioweapon back to its source. They decoded its design. They documented everything, the laboratory where it was built, the scientists who designed it, the Ulari officials who authorized it, and they broadcast it all. Every species that the Ulari had ever traded with, every civilization that had ever trusted them, every world that had ever welcomed their scientists and diplomats, all of them received a complete, verified, undeniable record of what the Ulari had attempted, the schematics of the bioweapon, the authorization codes, the internal communications discussing acceptable casualties and species termination protocols. The Ulari collective was not destroyed by human weapons, it was destroyed by the truth. Within a year, every trade agreement was canceled, every alliance was dissolved, every embassy was closed. The collective fractured into warring factions, each one blaming the others, each one trying to distance themselves from the crime that the whole galaxy now knew about. While humanity had defeated the third great power without firing a single shot, and then they came to the conquered human fleet arrived at the capital system slowly, deliberately. They did not hide, they did not rush, they came in a formation that every species could see, broadcast on every channel visible to every sensor on every world, and they did not fire. A single shuttle separated from the fleet. It flew to the conquered station and docked. One person stepped out, a human woman. She was tall, with dark skin and gray hair and eyes that were calm and hard and sad all at the same time. She walked through corridors that had been built long before her species existed. She passed guards who stepped aside without being told. She entered the grand chamber, the same room where the conquered had voted to ignore humanity's plea for help, and she walked to the center of the floor. Every seat was filled, every elder race was represented. The chamber was silent, except for the sound of her footsteps. She carried something in her hands. Small box, plain and white. She set it on the High Council's table. She opened it. Inside was a skull, small, a child's skull, white and fragile, recovered from the ashes of Nova Catalina. She placed it gently on the table. She straightened up. She looked at the assembled representatives of the 12 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. We are alive, she said. Acknowledge it. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The skull sat on The table small and white and impossible to ignore. Rickethan was there, for he remembered the moment. He remembered the silence. He remembered looking at that skull and understanding, for the first time in his 4,000 years of life, what humanity had carried with them. Through 150 years of darkness, they did not seek to destroy us, he told the young delegates. His voice was barely a whisper now. That is what terrified us most. We understood destruction. We had done it ourselves many times. Destruction is simple. Destruction is clean. What humanity wanted was harder. Worse. He looked at the skull in his memory. They wanted us to see, to understand, to face what we had done and carry it the way they had carried it. They wanted us to feel the weight of 2,300,000 lives, not as a number, not as a statistic, but as people, as children, who had names and parents who loved them. In future that were stolen. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, standing in that chamber, looking at that small, broken skull, we felt it, all of it, and we understood that the child it had belonged to was more real, more important, more worthy of the galaxy's attention than every protocol and every rule and every vote we had ever cast. He opened his eyes. Humanity did not break us with their weapons. They broke us with a skull and a sentence, and that is the most human thing I have ever known. The chamber was very still. Rickethan could feel the weight of his own story pressing down on the room like gravity. The young delegates sat in their oversized chairs, small and quiet and changed. He could see it in their eyes, their postures, the way they held their bodies, the way people hold themselves when they have just learned something that makes the universe larger and more frightening than they thought it was. He understood. He had felt the same way once. What came after, he said slowly, was not what anyone expected, not the elder races, not the vassal species, not even, I think, the humans themselves. The galaxy waited for humanity to claim its throne. Every civilization that had ever risen to power had done the same thing. Crushed the old order, planted their flag on the ruins, and declared themselves the new masters. It was the oldest pattern in the universe. Power flows to the strong rule. The cycle continues. Humanity refused. In the days following the scene in the Grand Chamber, the human ambassador, her name was Adayafar, and when the galaxy would learn to remember it, met with the representatives of every elder race one by one. She did not make demands. She did not dictate terms. She asked questions. What did they want? What did they fear? What did they think had gone wrong? What would they change? The elder races did not know how to respond to this. They had prepared for conquest. They had prepared for punishment. They had not prepared to be asked their opinion by the species they had wronged. The Dravosi were the first to answer. Honestly, Rickethan remembered the meeting. He had been there, a junior member of the Dravosi delegation, sitting in the back of the room with his tendrils dim and his heart's beating faster than they had in centuries. The Dravosi representative, not Selith Vaughn, who was too old and too frail to attend, but her protege, a sharp-minded woman named Theles Kane, sat across from Adai's Akefer and said what no elder race had ever said to a younger species. We were wrong from the very beginning. We built a system that measured the worth of a species by its age, and we used that system to justify ignoring suffering and enabling cruelty. We are sorry, and we do not know how to fix it. Adai's Akefer had looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "That is the first honest thing any elder race has said to us. Thank you. Now let us fix it together." Restructuring took years. It was not clean or simple or painless. Old systems do not die easily, and the elder races had built their power over millions of years, dismantling the structures of control and privilege and indifference that held the conquered together. Was like taking apart a building while people were still living inside it, but it was done piece by piece, agreement by agreement, argument by argument. The Throne hegemony was dissolved, not just defeated, dissolved. Its government was dismantled. Its military was permanently disbanded. The 14 vassal species it had enslaved were given full sovereignty. They were given resources to rebuild, resources that came not just from humanity but from the Velroni themselves, who were required to account for every world they had drained and every species they had broken over. 600,000 years, the Velroni people were not destroyed or scattered. They were allowed to keep their home world and their immediate systems, but they were stripped of power and privilege and forced to exist as an ordinary species among equals for a civilization that had defined itself by dominance. This was worse than death, some of them said. So humanity's response was simple: the species you enslaved survived worse. Cathari dominion was reduced to a single system. The greatest military power the galaxy had ever known was contained to one star and its orbiting worlds. Their fleet was decommissioned. Their weapons were disassembled. Their colonies were redistributed to species that had been displaced by HFY expansion over the millennia. The HFY High Commander, ancient, proud, unbroken, even defeat, was offered a single courtesy. The Akapper met with him privately. No recording was made. No one else was present when she emerged, or she said only that they had reached an understanding. The High Commander lived for another 300 years. In all that time, he never spoke publicly about humanity or the war, but once in a private letter that was found after his death, he wrote a single sentence about the meeting with the human ambassador. She showed me what we looked like through their eyes, and I could not bear it. The Ulari collective fared no better, fractured by the revelation of their bioweapon program. The collective broke into a dozen warring factions, each trying to blame the others, each trying to claim innocence. The infighting lasted for decades. Worlds burned, populations scattered. The great scientific civilization that had once been the pride of the galaxy tore itself apart from the inside. Eventually, the surviving Umakari factions came to humanity and asked for help, not as a demand, not as a negotiation, as a plea. Humanity agreed to mediate on one condition: the Umakari would open their archives, all of them, every record from their entire history, every experiment, every species they had studied, every bioweapon they had designed, every managed population event, a polite term for targeted extinction that they had carried out. Over 600,000 years, 22 species, the Ulari had quietly, scientifically, methodically eliminated 22 species over the course of their history. Species that were inconvenient, species that were in the way, species that were interesting enough to study but not important enough to preserve. Archives were open, the records were broadcast, and the galaxy learned what had been done in the name of science and progress by a civilization it had trusted and admired. It was in its way more devastating than any battle. The new conquered rose slowly from the ashes of the old. It was not a perfect institution. Humanity did not pretend that it would be. Perfect systems do not exist. The humans knew this better than anyone, having spent their entire history trying and failing and trying again to build something fair on their own small world. But the new conquered was built on a single principle, one rule, written in every known language, carved into the walls of the new council chambers, encoded into every communication relay in the galaxy. No species is beneath notice, no life is beneath protection. The 14 species freed from Throne slavery were given seats on the council, Panado token seats, real representation, real power, real voices that could not be silenced by protocol or precedent or the arrogance of age. The young species, the ones that the old conquered had dismissed as pre-emergence, as not yet worthy, were brought in, protected, guided but not controlled, watched over but not judged, and humanity, the galaxy, waited for them to take the highest seat, to claim the role that their power and their victory had earned them. They said no. Ada Akafur stood before the first full session of the new conquered and addressed every species in the galaxy. We did not do this to rule, she said. We did not fight and suffer and wait for 150 years so that we could sit in the same chairs and make the same mistakes. We do not want to be what they were. If we want to make sure that no one is ever what they were again, humanity took a different role. They became wardens, guardians, protectors. They patrolled the borders of civilized space. They answered distress calls. They stood between the strong and the weak and said, not here, not again, not while we are watching. They asked for nothing in return, no tribute, no loyalty, no worship. They simply existed out there in the dark, between the stars, and the galaxy slept, better knowing they were there. Rickethan paused. His story was nearly finished. He could feel the weight of it lifting slowly, the way dawn lifts the weight of night. There is one more thing I must tell you, he said. Salith Vaugh, the analyst who had noticed humanity first, the woman who had written report after report, warning after warning, plea after plea. Ryan had been ignored every time. She lived long enough to see the restructuring begin. She was very old by then, older than any Dravosi had a right to be. Her body was failing her. Tendrils had gone dark for the last time, but her mind was still sharp and her 6 eyes still saw clearly. She served as the Dravosi ambassador during the early negotiations. She sat across from a Dazioper many times. They argued, they disagreed, they frustrated each other, and they became friends. It was a strange friendship. An ancient alien who had spent her life trying to make her people listen, and a human woman who had grown up on a world that existed because those people had not. They were separated by biology and history and pain and 4,000 light years of space. And when yet they understood each other the way only people who have fought for something larger than themselves can understand each other. Selith died quietly in her home, surrounded by her family. She was the oldest Dravosi. Recorded history. Her final request was simple. She asked that her name be given to something useful. Humanity honored that request. They named a deep space station after her, a massive structure positioned at the crossroads of 6 major shipping lanes serving as a waypoint, a hospital, a refuge, and a meeting place for species from across the galaxy. The Selith Vion station, it was one of the busiest places in civilized space. Ships of every species docked there, traded there, found shelter there, above its main entrance. In letters large enough to be read from orbit were two lines. The first was Kath's name, in the second was the dedication written by Ada Akakaffer herself, for the one who saw us when no one else would look. Rithin fell silent. His story was done. The chamber felt different now, smaller somehow and warmer. The ancient blue light seemed softer. The stars outside the window seemed closer. The young delegates sat in their chairs. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of understanding, full of weight, full of the kind of knowledge that changes the way a person sees the world. Then slowly, one by one, the young delegates turned in their seats. They looked toward the back of the chamber where a small group sat quietly in the shadows. The human delegation. They had been there the whole time, listening. They always listened. A woman sat at the front of the group. She was tall, with dark skin and a steady gaze, and gray hair cut close to her skull. On the inside of her left wrist, tattooed in simple black ink, were a set of coordinates, the coordinates of Nova Catalina. She was not a Desa Akur. Akeffer had died decades ago, full of years and purpose, but this woman carried the same look in her eyes, the look of someone who remembered and who would make sure the galaxy remembered. Too, the young delegates stared at her. She did not speak. She did not stand. She did not raise her hand or nod or smile. She simply met their eyes one by one, species by species. And in that look was everything that Rikathan story had tried to say, the pain and the patience and the fury and the mercy and the stubborn, impossible, unbreakable refusal to let cruelty become normal. Then she nodded just once, a small movement or a simple acknowledgement. We see you, we will not forget you, and we will not let anyone else forget you either. Rickon watched the exchange from his seat. His tendrils, dark for so long, flickered once with a faint warm light. He looked at the young delegates. He looked at the human woman. He looked at the empty chairs on the High Council, where three great powers had once sat, and decided that a small blue world did not matter. He thought about Selith Vaughn. He thought about Nova Catalina. He thought about a child's skull on a table and a voice that said, "We are alive," and then quietly, so softly that only those closest to him could hear. The oldest living being in the Galactic conquered, spoke his final words on the matter. The galaxy is old, young ones, and in all our ages of wisdom we made the oldest mistake there is, and we looked at something small and fragile and assumed it would stay that way. He looked at the human delegation one last time. Humanity was not the monster in this story. We were, and they were the ones kind enough to let us survive. Of learning that lesson, the chamber was quiet. The stars burned on, and somewhere out there in the dark spaces between the light, the wardens kept their watch, patient, silent, unbroken.